Okay, it's Tuesday, October 28th, so we've got a few more precious shopping days until Halloween before you can get out there and get that all-important Halloween candy. We've also got some unusually bizarre questions this evening. And of course, I'm going to, actually tonight I'm going to, I think, do something a little unusual. I'm going to be sharing the names, emails, and phone numbers of those people who have sent the most peculiar questions in. No, I'm not going to do that. But it sent a little thrill up and down your spine if you'd sent an unusual question in, didn't it? So let's start right off with some questions that have been sent in previously, and as usual, please, as we're talking here, send in your questions live on the chat. Here's somebody who says, how do I address empty promises? My husband, and I'll call him John just because I'm sure some people get tired of everybody being called Fred, makes commitments and promises to me all the time. For example, he makes commitments to do chores, makes commitments about going places, tending to our young son, and so on. And he consistently breaks these promises. I'm constantly disappointed because he fails to uphold his end of the bargain. These promises can be as simple as changing our son's diaper while I'm gone, to being home on time so that he can watch the baby while I go to an appointment, to supposedly forgetting to take the trash out or forgetting to install door hardware in our home. I'm still waiting on that last one, the door hardware, after 16 months. That would be quite a long time. Hardly be ascribable to forgetting, could it? Clearly, I'm wanting some kind of action on his part to resolve this, but I know that's not real love. Well, wanting isn't not necessarily a lack of real love, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, do I just ask for what I need and not expect it when he promises that he will do it? Keep in mind, this man does not lift a finger around the house unless I request help, and even then, he will complain and whine about it for days until I do it myself. Baby bottles have to be washed and dinner must be made. So there's some misconceptions here about real love and making requests. When you get to the place where you're increasingly unconditionally loving, that does not mean that you have to do everything around the house. That doesn't mean that you become somebody else's slave. In a relationship where you are more unconditionally loving than your partner, that doesn't mean that you do everything and your partner sits around while you wait on your partner hand and foot. That's called slavery. That's not unconditional loving. In unconditional loving, you offer freely whatever love you choose, and you have to remember that real love is where you care about your partner's happiness. Now, please remember that happiness on your partner's part involves your partner. Your partner can't be happy unless your partner is loved, which involves your serving your partner, to be sure, and involves you loving your partner. But your partner can't be happy unless your partner is three things, not just loved. Loved, loving, and responsible. So if you walk around serving your partner hand and foot, your partner might feel loved, but frankly, it just sounds like your partner feels entitled. And people who are entitled victims and who are served all the time don't even end up feeling loved. They just end up feeling served and getting what they want. So frankly, your partner probably doesn't even end up feeling loved. And since I happen to know who your partner is, I know your partner doesn't feel loved. He's just grouchy and selfish. So he isn't responsible. he isn't loving. And when people who are, now this is really important, it really is a three-legged stool, if you want to picture this, being happy, loved, loving, and responsible. And if you don't keep all three of the legs of that stool intact and maintained, none of the three legs work. So here you are trying to maintain just one leg of the stool. Well, gee, surprise, it's not working, is it? So you're loving this guy, you're doing all the chores around the house, and it's not working. He's not feeling loved, he's not responsible, he's not loving himself, and he's a miserable human being. So something's got to be done. And since you're his partner, nobody else is going to help this guy to feel responsible. Nobody else is going to help this guy be accountable for his behavior. Nobody else is going to help this guy to become an increasingly loving person. Well, so whose job does that become? Pretty much you're going to have to take that job. Now, it's not your job to make him become responsible and loving, but it is your job as his partner, as the other half of him, to at least help him work toward those conditions. So whether you like the job or not, it's yours. So what are you going to do? Well, I would suggest that you ask him for some time when you can talk to him uninterrupted, which would require that the baby be asleep or gone at a neighbor's house, whatever. But you can't be interrupted for this discussion. And you simply describe to him, you cannot be irritated during this discussion. You cannot say things like, you don't ever help around here. You start off a discussion like that, and the discussion is over before you start, because all he'll do is defend himself and attack you in return, or withdraw, or whatever. You're cooked. You simply describe that there are a certain number of jobs around the house that need to be done. This is just a description of fact. You would be wise to write them out. I would actually write them out in terms of tasks that need to be done one time, like the door hardware. We have the door hardware, we have this that need tasks, just one-time jobs. Then write out a list of tasks that have to be done on an ongoing basis. In other words, weekly jobs, daily jobs, more than daily jobs, like, changing diapers, blah, 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 blah. Write out all these jobs that have to be done all the time, so that he gets a picture of the work that has to be done. Emphasize, you've got to write out the jobs that have to be done on a regular basis, because, see, you are foolishly approaching him each time an individual task has to be done. That's dumb. If there's a job that has to be done on a regular basis and you approach him each time it has to be done, you're put yourself in the position of a beggar each time. Wrong. There needs to be a delegation of authority, a delegation of delegation of labor, so that people just simply take care of a job all the time. In our household, there are things that just simply have to be done all the time. And if you had to approach that person each time and go, would you please pick up that thing each time, how annoying is that? No, instead, it's just that person's job to do that all the time. So you approach him with a list. It's written. You say, here are the jobs that have to be done. Then you ask him, do you agree that all these jobs have to be done? How could he possibly say no? What you're doing by that is getting him in the habit in your conversation of saying yes. That sounds like a small thing, but you're already cooperating with something. Sounds little, but it's not. You're already functioning as a team saying yes. Then you ask him whether it makes sense to him that one of you should be doing all the jobs. Well, of course it doesn't. Now, if he works outside the home and you don't, then it does not make sense that you should take those jobs and split them down the middle. It makes sense that you would do a majority of the jobs that take place at home. If he's working outside the home, it only makes sense that you would do most of the jobs in the home. And if that's true, which I happen to know is true, then you should say that. That's going to help forestall a lot of the arguments. If you just say right off the bat, I work in the home, and so it only makes sense that I should do most of these jobs. Well, see, that's going to help. That's going to create a more cooperative atmosphere right off, because he's already going to come up with that argument. So you come up with it first. Then ask him whether he wants, obviously he doesn't want to do all the jobs. And you say, I don't want to do all the jobs either. And so say, isn't it kind of obvious that we need to come up with some kind of division of labor, recognizing that most of these jobs I'm willing to do. And, so do you agree that we do need to come up with some kind of apportionment or some kind of division so that these jobs can be done with the greatest degree of harmony between us, so that we can eliminate some of the conflict that you and I have been experiencing regarding these jobs? Do you agree that that would be happier than the way that we're doing it now? Well, who could say, no, I would like more conflict? So you say to him, so let's have a meeting. You and I have a meeting every single day to talk about the single jobs that need to be done, like putting the door, the hardware on the door. Single jobs we need to talk about every day. But then let's also talk now, or we could talk at another time if you'd like, about apportioning out the jobs that need to be done on a regular basis. Like, for example, the lawn needs to be mowed weekly. Is that a job that I should do, or is that a job that you're willing to do? And then what you do between you is you apportion out the regularly accomplished jobs. And then you continue to meet every day to talk about the jobs, the regular jobs and the single time jobs, to make sure that all the tasks are getting done, so that never do you get behind and never do you get resentful. All jobs, by the way, have to be written out. All jobs. You can learn about this, by the way, a great deal more about it in the Real Love and Marriage book. Anything that's not written down tends to become a source of misunderstanding. And so rather than confronting him, this simply needs to become a discussion about things that need to be done. And no matter how snotty he becomes about it, well, I don't want, because I know I can hear the objections. Well, he becomes all snotty. I understand. And when he becomes snotty about it and resentful, you don't come back and defend yourself. You simply say, this job needs to be done. The hardware needs to be put on the door. I don't know how to put the hardware on the door. This is a job that's been on the assignment list for 16 months. So the job, by what date do you think you can have this done? Always be specific about the assignment of a task. By when is it going to be done? Just like it would be done at work. You might even bring that up with him. If this were a job that was going to be done at work, how would you suggest that it be done? You always stay calm, rational, and you talk about the assignment of the job rather than the fact that he's been a completely irresponsible boob. Always the job. You're working together as a team. But see, rather than picking on him, remember that you're trying to teach him to be more responsible, because only as he's more responsible can he be happier. The goal is to help him become more loved, loving, because see, as he's doing these tasks, he's contributing more to the family and becomes more loving and responsible. He has to do these things in order for him to be happier. The goal of these things is that he be happier, not just that he gets the hardware on the door. It's when you see the higher goal in these things that your attitude will change too in the meetings. It's all about happiness, not hardware on doors. And as you see that, I believe your attitude will improve in the meetings, and that will improve his attitudes. We forget that a lot as we talk to our partners. That it's always about real love. It's not about an individual task. And if we will remember that the goal is about real love and not about an individual thing, that can make quite a difference in the way we approach people. Here's somebody who says, hang on a second, here's a live question. I recently started dating a guy that I really like. We have a great time together, but I get bent out of shape when he cancels a date. For example, he had to cancel tonight because he was depressed. Well, by all means, insist on having the date while he's depressed. That should work out well. That was a joke. Let me continue reading. I'm trying to trust and love him, but instead, I find myself clinging. Any suggestions on how I can be loving instead of clinging, specifically with someone that is depressed? I just feel like I want to trust him and have faith, but my history tells me that I shouldn't trust because I've been hurt. Wait, is that victim? Oh, okay. So this is easy. Always as you're talking with somebody, choose to trust them, especially as you're dating them, and remember that the entire purpose of dating there are two purposes in dating. It's to practice telling the truth about yourself and being loving. That's the first purpose. And the second purpose is to gather information about your partner. So, in this particular case, you have a wonderful opportunity to do both. So, this guy says to you, you said you're having a great time together, which in the dating process is kind of like a no-brainer. Like, so what? Who can't have a great time during the dating process? Big deal. Every single couple who gets divorced had a great time in the dating process. So, I'm not making fun of you, but I am making fun of that statement. I am. So when people say, we had a really great time while we were dating, yeah, big deal. Everybody does. Now, not everybody has a great time dating, but in the end, everybody who got divorced did. And so what predictor of success is that? That would be a zero predictor. Zero. But this little experience is a great practice opportunity. So you choose to believe him. Now then, the next time you get together with him, what you do is you ask him questions. You give him an opportunity to do, and I strongly suggest you read Real Love and Dating. You ask him some of the questions, and there are pages of questions in Real Love and Dating that give you exactly what to ask him. So you say to him, so you said you were feeling depressed the last time that you called me and you canceled the date. So tell me, what do you mean by depressed? You were feeling depressed about what? Because when people are feeling depressed, they're feeling discouraged, they're feeling frustrated, they're feeling angry. Then you ask him to describe some of his getting and protecting behaviors. They're feeling empty. You introduce to them the concept of unconditional love, and if somebody's feeling depressed, I tell you, they're not feeling unconditionally loved. You give him an opportunity to tell the truth about his fears, flaws, emptiness, failures, those things. And if somebody who's depressed can't talk about their fears, flaws, mistakes, failures, and so on, look at my lips. Move on. Because what a great opportunity for this guy to tell you the truth about himself. If he can't do that while you're dating, you think he's going to do it later? It's not likely. And this is a great opportunity for you to practice being unconditionally accepting and trusting while he's in this condition. So, beautiful chance for you to get to know this guy. So this is nothing. The fact that he canceled the date, meaningless. It's a great chance for you to actually get to know who he is. The fact that he told you he was depressed is a teeny little introduction into the truth about himself. But if that's all he can say, he hasn't told you much of anything at all. Let's continue. How do I continue to love somebody unconditionally who time and time again demonstrates that he either is not aware of his unloving behavior or just doesn't care how he treats me, without feeling like I'm a doormat or feeling like I'm being taken advantage of, because he knows that I'm practicing real love and I'm set on learning how to become a more loving person. I care about this person and don't want to walk away, but would rather like to understand how I can become more loving and accepting of him, even when he is consistently being unloving. So, with a person like this, of course, obviously you want to absolutely refrain from any unloving behavior on your part, even when he is being using on his part. If he continues, however, to be, it's a great opportunity for you to practice being loving. But if he continues to be unloving on his part, and you absolutely get to the end of your rope, to where it's just too frustrating to deal with him when you think that he's using you, or particularly if he's being ugly, you just withdraw. If an interaction becomes more than you can deal with lovingly, then you just leave the interaction. Never continue in an interaction when it's more than you can handle in an unconditionally loving way. Real love never obligates you to be in over your head. Now, if you're in an interaction and he becomes, for example, actually abusive, like calls you names, you still withdraw. On those occasions, it's often useful to tell him why you're withdrawing, why you're leaving. Leaving and withdrawing are different from running. We run from an interaction when we do it pretty much involuntarily and when we do it in fear. We leave or we withdraw from an interaction when we can see that if we stayed in it, we would become emptied out and begin to use getting and protecting behaviors. When we say, this would be unwise for me to stay in this situation, and when we consciously make the choice that it would be more loving to leave. That's leaving and withdrawing. And on those occasions, you might tell him that you're not telling him to stop his behavior, like you're describing here, where he demonstrates that he's either not aware of his unloving behavior or he doesn't care how he treats you. But for example, let's say that he's just being intimidating or unkind, or for example, using language that's abusive. That happens. You might say to him, I'm not telling you to stop this. You may choose to behave in any way that you wish, but I just want to tell you that I'm getting to the place where it's not any fun for me anymore. And so if you choose to continue, you may, but I'd rather be somewhere else. This isn't fun for me anymore. So do as you like, but if you continue, I'll leave, and I'll go, back to my house. Let's say you're at a restaurant. You may even stay here. Let's say he brought you in his car. I'll catch a cab and go home. And if you can do that and not be angry, what a beautiful example of you being loving and yet choosing to leave the situation, or in this case, leave the pig. Here's somebody who says, my husband left 2 months ago. I found out 2 years ago that he had been a sex addict for 8 years. Let me pause before I go on and read the rest of this person's message to say that this is not at all uncommon. Porn addicts, for example, hide their addictions for a very long time, usually before anybody else discovers them. There was just a few days ago a Hollywood actor who was, it was announced on the news, I'm sure to his embarrassment, was announced on the news as a sex addict, an internet porn addict, and he was admitted into treatment for some unspecified period of time, and he hoped that his public would be kind to him and his family, but apparently he'd been an internet porn addict for quite some time, and nobody knew. And it's such an easy addiction to acquire. In the old days, if you wanted to be addicted to pornography, wow, you had to kind of go out of your way. I mean, you had to, park on the road in front of everybody, in front of these porn establishments. You had to risk being seen by everybody. If you went to any other kind of store, you had to walk up to the counter and say, "I would like the porn magazine." The guy had to reach under the counter and pull it out, and you had to risk being seen by your friends and neighbors. You had to go out in places where people could see you. Now, you can sit in the privacy of your home and be an addict and nobody will know. In fact, many of these people are married and they indulge in their porn addictions in the next room with their wives on the opposite side of the same wall, and their wives haven't known for years. So it's easy to acquire, it's easy to indulge and maintain these addictions and do it in privacy. So you continue. I am just now learning where this source of addiction comes from, the lack of love in his life, and my part of that as well. And again, addictions have for many years, and in fact still, most people think that addictions are diseases, as though somehow they come from outer space or from, I guess, the toilet seat, and that they're communicable and just take you over. And this is not the case. Addictions are our response to pain. You continue. I have some concerns for our children. Last week my mother was watching my kids and called to tell me that she had discovered my middle two children, girl 9, boy 8, had been taking pictures of themselves with their pants pulled down, which they thought were funny, which, let me pause and say, is, understandable. That for an 8 and 9-year-old, these are very, very unlikely to be sexual pictures. They're just mysterious, exciting, maybe a little naughty because they knew they weren't supposed to, because the kids do know that what they're doing is not acceptable because they do it in private. They don't do this out in the middle of the road or in the front yard. So they know they're not supposed to, but not sexual. So not a crisis, but let's continue. You write, this week my youngest daughter, 7, so we got a 7, 8, and 9-year-old, said in my babysitter's car, touch my potty, which I assume means touch my private parts, to her brother and pulled her pants down. After last week's incident, I spoke to all of them about the seriousness of this behavior. At first, they did not understand. My oldest daughter did, but the other two did not. We kept discussing the consequences of what could happen, like mom could go to jail if these pictures were found, and that it is not funny. Later I spoke to them individually, and my oldest daughter said that she saw it on a movie where a kid was mooning another kid and took his picture. I feel stumped and normally would punish them in the past. No TV or friends and extra chores. I feel that I need to protect them even though I know my husband's addiction has nothing to do with our kids. That's a good call. His sexual addiction, even though it has to do with nakedness and sex, and even though there appears to be some link between that and what your children are doing, there isn't. I can't help but wonder where this is coming from. And you would be a little hypersensitive to this, understandably. I need help to handle this in a most loving way. So to kids this age, this just isn't a sexual thing, but they do need to understand that this behavior is still nonetheless not acceptable. So it needs to be explained to them that what we're talking about here is the handling of, discussion of, and photography of private parts. They're not going to understand at 7, 8, and 9, very unlikely. Your 9-year-old might. You're going to have to determine in a discussion with the 9-year-old whether the 9-year-old understands sex. Kids are understanding sex at younger and younger ages, so you're going to have to figure that out. And I would suggest that you do that. But the 7 and the 8-year-old are not. And that private parts are just that. They're private. We keep them to ourselves, which is why we cover them with clothing, which is why, for example, do you ever see mom walk outside the door naked? They'll probably laugh. No. And that's why I'm telling you, it's obvious to them what private means. That's why they'll laugh when you say, do you ever see mom walk outside naked? No. Why? Because these are private parts. This is why we cover them up. This is why we don't take baths out in the front yard. See, these are terms they understand. We wear clothing to cover our private parts. People who have good sense, you say, do this. Now, there are people who don't have good sense, and you need to explain this to them, because periodically they will see people like the kid that you were talking about in the movie who was mooning another kid, and he took a picture of it. There are people who do not demonstrate good sense. There are people who drive too fast. There are people who take pictures of other people's private parts. Describe some other examples of people who do really stupid things. But just because other people do stupid things doesn't mean you should. So make that really plain to them. Just because 10 million flies eat dog poop doesn't mean you should. And the kids will smile, they'll laugh. You're making light of it, but you're not turning it into a joke. You're showing them that there are plenty of people who are stupid and will do dumb stuff, but that doesn't mean that they should. So these are private parts, and that's why we cover them up. And so there are certain things that we have to learn to do in this world that keep us two things: safe and happy. And that's what they have to understand: safety and happiness. And so you start to list them. And you ask them to help you add to the list. What are some things in the world that we do that keep us safe and happy? See, notice how you're not making this sexual. You're making it simply about generic safetiness and happiness. We don't hit each other. People don't hit each other. We don't hurt each other's feelings. That's why we don't call each other names. Kids need to understand the purpose of rules and guidelines. They're to protect our safety and to enhance our safetiness. Get the point? Otherwise, if you simply impose rules on kids, for example, if you say, "Oh, don't ever do anything like that again. Go to your room, I'll punish you." What you've just done is you've made a wrong thing really exciting, and now as soon as you turn your back, the first thing this kid's going to do is pull down his pants and have other kids look at him. You've actually made it more interesting. No, there are just certain things that we do to protect our safety and enhance our happiness. We don't hit each other, we don't hurt other people's feelings, and we don't expose our private parts, and we don't touch the private parts of other people. We don't do that. Now, as your kids get old enough, you explain to them the obvious exception of not touching the private parts of other people as you explain sex to them. And you're going to have to decide how old your kids are when you explain that. It's kind of obvious when you explain that, because kids start asking you questions. Why do people do that? You'll be watching a movie, and a couple will go into a room in an obviously alluring and suggestive way. What are they going to do? There are so many clues that they're going to give you that they're wondering about and have clues about sex. And that's when you start bringing that up. But at this point, you get all freaked out, so will they. Brief announcement. California this weekend. Newsletter is going to be coming out end of today, so we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in San Francisco. That will be a hoot. We've got somebody here who's asking the question, my partner works permanent nights, and he says himself that he recognizes that a lot of his behavior is dictated by his work pattern and his unhappiness at work. Well, that's usually pretty much an excuse when somebody says, my work makes me unhappy. Now what happens is his work simply unveils or uncovers his basic unhappiness. That's the case. If work makes him unhappy, then pretty much then every single person where he works would have to be an unhappy person. And I'll bet that's not the case. I mean, it's just never the case. Our environments simply expose our underlying condition. By the end of the week, he's exhausted. Sometimes he comes around, and a little information for those who are listening. This person's not married to her partner, but they do share ownership of a home. And so he comes around and kind of used to live there, but because they weren't getting along, doesn't live there now. Sometimes he comes around, but at other times he says he's so depressed, or he can't sleep, or he's just so miserable that he won't come. He says that he doesn't come around to protect others from his dis-ease, in other words, his misery. Well, maybe. But it's more likely that he does this to protect himself, because if it were truly selfless, then when he's around you and your children, he would behave in a loving way. But he does not. Then you continue. The thing is that you have, if you've been brought up to think that unconditional love is to make sacrifices for other people, or to think of other people first, surely this in itself can become a getting and protecting behavior. Is he really being loving, or is he being selfish? When the two look the same, how do I distinguish between the two? Well, in a given moment, it can often be very difficult to distinguish whether anybody is doing something for you unconditionally or for themselves. So in this case, how do you tell? Well, first, when he makes this sacrifice and you don't give him what he wants, like when he doesn't come around and doesn't spend time with you, when you're not grateful and you're not sufficiently accommodating and you're not cooperative, how does he behave? Is he disappointed or irritated? If that's the case, then he's not doing this to be loving. He's doing it for himself. And second, how is his behavior overall? Is he loving overall? He's not. We tend to be who we are most of the time. And like you describe here, he's depressed and miserable and grouchy and fairly contentious with your daughters, and is so miserable with you most of the time that he had to move out. So the likelihood that his not coming around is motivated primarily by a love for you is pretty close to zero. He stays away from you because it's easier for him. And then, because that sounds selfish, he phrases it in a way to make it sound like he's being selfless. Well, of course. Who doesn't want to sound selfless? Now, is it possible that he could have a component of unconditional love in there? Sure. But it's very unlikely that that's his primary motivation. Very unlikely. Now then, you continue. You say, my partner has now made the decision that he wants to come back and live with us. But he's concerned that I have not got my teenage girls working as a team to keep the house tidy. Over the years, I've been more biased toward the approach of discussing and giving the girls a choice rather than saying, you will do this about tasks, except when I've gotten angry. It's not that they can't cook, iron, wash, and so on, but they choose not to do it when things need to get done. I have noticed that when I am doing it with them, mostly they will join in, but it's getting them to do things at times that will make things move smoothly in a family that I have problems with. In other words, your daughters will work to do things around the house when it is convenient for them. Because you've just said that when you really need things to get done, they really don't participate. The way you've raised your daughters to be responsible is not working, let's just say. And you need to not feel criticized, but they're going to grow up being less than responsible. I mean, they're already teenage girls. Now imagine them showing up at a job. So listen here rather than feel criticized. Imagine them showing up at a job and saying to their boss that they'll participate when they're ready, that they'll participate in the completion of a task when they feel like it. Imagine them participating in a job as they do at home. They'd be fired in an hour. So what they're learning is, I'll pretty much do what I want, and that will not work. Now, sure, they can participate in the initial assignment of jobs. You know, for example, one girl could say, well, I'd rather wash the dishes than do the laundry. Great, as far as an ongoing, assignment. But once you have that assignment, that is your job. And it has to be done by a certain time of day every single day. And, of course, the assignment and the carrying out of the jobs and the assignment of accountability does need to be done with unconditional love. But these girls are not learning responsibility. Now let's continue. After he said that he would like to move back and make his request, that's your partner, he actually said that these were really the terms of that he was going to come back. I took the opportunity to request that he would listen to some of the Real Love and Parenting book. He agrees in principle to the concepts in Real Love, and on Sunday agreed that the only way to make all this work is by unconditional love. Could you recommend which part of the book would be most beneficial for us to listen to? That's like, could you recommend which part of the car would be most useful if we're going to take a long journey? If you're going to really make this work in your family, you can't listen to part of it. You're going to really have to digest the entire thing, because you can't study the part on responsibility unless you also apply the part that has to do with unconditionally loving them. So you're going to have to start from the beginning. And it's all right if you listen to the audio part, but you're also going to pretty much have to have the written book in front of you. Some people do better with the written word, and you're going to have to refer back to it from time to time, so that later when the girls or you or your partner say, well, now, wait a minute, what did it say about assignment of jobs? It's much harder to go back through an audiobook than it is to a book and go to the index and look that up and go to the right page and refer to it. So I actually recommend that you, in addition to the audio part, have the book as an ongoing reference that you can go back to and read. So you're really going to need to read the book, and I suggest that you actually make this a contract. You and your partner are not married, and so I would actually say that the two of you say, since you're not, that you say contingent to you moving back in, that it be part of the contract that you and he read Real Love and Marriage together. Ironclad contract that you two read it together every single day. And I would suggest you go through the 40 days together. The 40 days toward real love and happiness in marriage. And that you, he, and the girls all together read or listen to Real Love and Parenting. Because those have to be the rules that govern the house. If you're all not on the same page about parenting, you're going to stumble more times than you can begin to count. He will go to what he's going to probably call discipline the girls, and it's going to be on a completely different wavelength than you would do it, because he's going to tend to control. You've already demonstrated a strong inclination toward being permissive. And when permissiveness and controlling clash, it is a disaster. And I don't really think you want to keep repeating this disaster. And this is the most common mistake I see in parenting, is the constant waffling back and forth between controlling and permissiveness. And it turns out there is no happy medium between permissiveness and controlling. It's not a medium. It's not an average. It's not something in between. It's something completely different. It's called loving and teaching. And that's what real love and parenting will teach you to do. So I would suggest that either he stays out of the house until you've read Real Love and Parenting, or he comes into the house, you do Real Love and Marriage and Real Love and Parenting, and he agrees to stay out of the parenting until you have all gone through Real Love and Parenting together, at which point you all agree to abide by an entirely different kind of parenting. Because if these girls are doing it as you describe and pretty much doing the jobs when they, darn well feel like it, this is really going to be harmful to them out in the real world. They go to get their first job and they say to their boss, well, I really don't feel like that. That's going to be a miserable first day. Here's a live question from somebody who says, my daughter is very angry. She's 9. Every time I try to even speak with her, she cuts me off or gets upset about anything. I've been trying to just love her, but it's hard. When she's talking back to me or others, I'm not sure if I should lay out a consequence or how to handle this in a loving way. If you give a child a consequence for being angry, you're going to make her more angry. So when a child is angry, then the instant the child is angry, you say to the child, so tell me what it is you're trying to say to me. Because your anger doesn't communicate in words what you're trying to say. All I hear is you screaming and being nasty. Now, you can do that, but out in the world and pretty much everywhere you go, as you are nasty and being unkind, and as you're using words like whatever it was she just used, all people will do is fight you back. So, can you try to put into words what you're angry about? You feel mad that I what? And then you, as a loving parent, can respond exactly to what the child is angry about. That does not mean that, for example, the child says, well, I'm mad that you don't give me cotton candy for dinner every day. That does not mean that you're now obligated to give the child cotton candy. No, parents have a misunderstanding about that. Just because the child's mad about something doesn't mean you have to give the child whatever the child wants. Or because the child says, I'm mad that you don't let me have a new car when the child is 12. Well, you don't have to give the child a new car. No. But you do need to listen. And most children are quite angry that their parents have never listened. And we tend to cut them off. And when they get mad, and then we say, now, you can't talk to me like that. Well, remember, they were mad in the first place because we didn't listen. And then when we say, you can't talk to me like that, what we're saying is, I'm never going to listen to you. Now they're even madder. So we need to keep listening to them, even if they're screaming. So if a child is screaming, you need to say, I'm going to sit here and listen to you until I understand what you're saying. Now, if you've got a 4-year-old who's screaming, I'll only listen for so long. And if they're in a screaming tantrum, then what I'll say is, I would really love to hear what you're saying, but I can't understand you when you're screaming. Like when they're screaming and, kicking and they're pounding their fists on the floor. And I don't say it irritated. I just say, I can't understand you when you're screaming. So I'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes and I'll see if we can talk then. And usually the child will stop in moments because no child screams alone for very long. They're only screaming to get you to listen in the first place. And when it's pretty obvious that you're genuinely willing to listen, they stop and then they start speaking. Amazing. So you just want to get this child to speak to you. Let me know how this works, because it tends to work like pretty uniformly. No kidding. It works with, in fact, children of almost all ages. This also works with husbands and wives, amazingly. I was talking to a woman, let me see here if I got to all the... Yes, I did. All right, let's deal with this live question then. Today, for instance, I found myself being such a victim. I was focusing on everything I didn't have, everything I lacked. I found myself comparing myself to others. It was horrible. I find that when I start feeling like a victim, I can tend to look for validation from others to see how I measure up. The thing is that it doesn't ever make me feel any better. It always makes me feel less than and very, very alone. I'm glad I have a place that I can tell the truth about myself so that I can, at the very least, be seen for such silly mistakes that I make. When we feel like victims and we look for validation as victims, we never feel better. It's only in telling the truth about ourselves in places like this that we ever feel any better. So telling the truth is such a simple step, and as we repeat it over and over again, really miracles happen. I was talking to a woman earlier this week who has, we were talking earlier about a woman who wrote in about her husband who was a sex addict, and then about her children who were exposing themselves, which is not related to sex addiction. But I talked to a woman earlier who had been living with a sex addict for many years, and he continues to act out sexually. Been a porn addict for, from the time he was just a young kid, and has really never been sober from the time he was like 12. And he has been going to a counselor, but he often misses his meetings, goes to support meetings, but he misses those fairly regularly. In fact, he misses more regularly than he attends. He lies to his counselor, describes how sober he is when he really isn't. So he's lying to his counselor, he's missing his meetings. He uses sexually when he's in the home, and she, in an attempt to be supportive and loving, now pay attention to this misguided understanding of what supportive is, has been staying out of it, thinking that it would be too intrusive to stick her nose in his affairs. And this is a wrong attitude. Sometimes we actually have to stick our nose in other people's affairs to help people. She's been trying to unconditionally love him, but when you're dealing with an addict, they become so numbed, they become so deadened by the use of their drug, no matter what it is, whether it's sex or alcohol or drugs, that they get to the place where they can't feel love anymore, and something has to happen. And so he isolates himself, he's abusive and angry, he's unkind toward his child, he's unkind toward her. He's just become an angry, miserable human being. So my suggestion to her was this, that she call the counselor, that she intrude, that she insist that he get more help. If necessary, that he get inpatient counseling, that she call his work if necessary and insist that he get help. Tell his counselor that he's lying. that if necessary, she tell him that he must move out until he gets this under control. Because, see, he's living under the protection of the law of choice. He loves that, the law of choice that says we all get to choose what we, say, think, or do. But he isn't doing anything about the law of responsibility, which says that we're responsible for our choices. So he gets to make any of the choices that he wants, and then he's essentially making her carry the brunt of the responsibility for the choices that he's making. And he needs to be more accountable for what he's doing. So she does need to make him more accountable. She needs to talk to his counselor. She needs to intrude more in letting people know that he's lying. But she needs to be very careful not to do any of this with any anger. Because if she becomes the slightest bit angry, then what will he do? He won't make this about his addiction. He won't make this about his behavior. He'll make this all about her. As his spirit, as his soul has become numbed, he's just become an increasingly ugly and selfish human being. Addictions are all selfish. Doesn't help around the house. He's more abusive emotionally and verbally to her, and she needs to hold him accountable for that. Each time he treats her in this way, she needs to stop him right then and point out what he's doing. Addicts just become insufferably selfish human beings, and they get to do that, but they also must be held accountable for their behavior in a loving way. So it needs to be really clear that within the principles of real love, we do need to be loving. But sometimes we also need to be unerringly firm in holding people accountable for their behavior that is damaging both to them and to the people around them. And in doing so, we are being unconditionally loving because we're contributing to their happiness. We're helping them to feel loved, loving, and responsible, which are the three legs of the stool that enable us to be happy. So, as usual, it's been an utter delight to be with you here on Tuesday the 28th. We'll see a bunch of you in California this weekend, and we look forward to seeing the rest of you a week from today on the next Tuesday. And between now and then, remember that it's always about real love. We'll see you then.